Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim. The weather is warming up finally. It's feeling to me like that is causing your mood to warm up a little bit. Hope everyone out there is doing great. But yeah, am I correct in thinking this? How are you?
Yeah, I think you are. I probably have a much cheerier mood during warmer weather, and that might be a little subconscious on my part. But I'm doing great, Lance. I'm really excited to introduce this conversation with one of our friends in this field, someone who's been on the show before. She is one of the heroes of this true crime space. Her name is Kristen Mittelman of Othram Labs, and you can check out everything that Othram does at othram.com. That's OTHRAM.com, and they also run DNAsolves.com, which is a great website and a resource, but also has a database for you to upload your DNA results.
Kristen's a real rock star in this industry. We're fortunate to have her as a friend, and we're able to speak with her not about just one or two updates when it comes to the work that Othram is doing and DNA Solves, the work that they're doing, because they literally are solving cases daily. Multiple cases come in daily, and they're either right about to be solved or they have just been solved. We had scheduled an interview with Kristen like a week before this one. She had to postpone and reschedule because she was doing something at the Senate in regards to her work. So it's not just what you see in the media when you read about, for example, the identity of the Lady of the Dunes. Or in this conversation, we speak about Granby Girl, Patricia Tucker. There's so many more. So you really do need to go to their website and check out the work that Kristen, her husband David, and the entire team at Othram are doing.
Yeah, it is an impressive organization, Lance. And you mentioned Granby Girl and Patricia Tucker. Yes, we are going to speak about this case with Kristen. This was a case of a Jane Doe who was found in Granby, Massachusetts, off the road on November 15th, 1978, and she was only recently identified as Patricia Ann Tucker. So she has her identity back after so many decades, Lance. And we were lucky enough to speak with Lou Barry just a couple weeks ago, who is the former police chief of Granby, Massachusetts. And he worked on the case a little bit, and Othram worked on the case quite a bit. And in an upcoming episode, we have Patricia Tucker's son, Matt Dale, who is going to come on the show. And we recorded that interview already, and that is very emotional, and we are really looking forward to sharing that with you as well.
I think it's a wonderful testament to the people who contribute their voices to this show and to the other shows that shine a spotlight on missing individuals or unidentified victims. The conversation that you spoke about with Matt was amazing because we get to tell what happens on the other side of these stories. And all of these other episodes that we've done, specifically about Granby Girl, Patricia Tucker, having Lou Barry on, having Kristen Mittelman on, talking about this is the first part of the story. And Matt is the bridge to the other part of the story. And that's all I'm going to say right now, other than it was one of the most powerful conversations that we've had so far this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kristen speaks about connections with family, and you can really hear it in her voice and in just by Othram's move to change their logo, as Kristen discusses in the interview. They really care. They really care about people and about solving these cases. And you can hear about the technology, and admittedly, a lot of it is over my head, but it is amazing what they're doing at Othram.
Speaking of it being over our heads, stay tuned for the upcoming debate between Tim, myself, and Kristen Mittelman. That's going to be a live-streamed event where we debate her on all things science and DNA, and I think we're really going to put her against the ropes there, Tim.
Yep. I'm going to start with the pyramids, and I got some theories. But, okay, I hope you enjoy this interview with Kristen Mittelman. She is wonderful. And check out DNAsolves.com. And also, if you'd like to hear Missing ad-free, check out Missing Premium, now on Apple Podcasts. You get every episode ad-free, early releases, and our weekly bonus show, which people love.
You know what else people love, Tim? Our social media, but some people don't know where to find that. So if you could just give them a little nudge in the right direction, that would be outstanding.
Sure thing. People can find us at Missing CSM on social media. Thanks a lot for listening, everyone. We're going to cut quick for commercial here, and we'll be right back with Kristen Mittelman. Kristen Mittelman, welcome back to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me back.
Well, you're always welcome on the show, even after the day where you sort of blew us off, but you had a good excuse. If anyone can not show up to an interview, we had this scheduled for last week, and honestly, Tim and I were around the 15-minute mark. We're like, she's definitely out there helping solve more cases, because you're usually super punctual. So I want to bring everybody up to speed just a little bit. What was it that prevented last week's conversation?
I do a lot of the government affairs and all the things that sort of have to do with government understanding this technology and adopting this technology. What we see more times than not here at Othram is law enforcement is now ready to use this technology. They have cases that would benefit from this technology. We've been able, since the last time I got on the show, we've been able to make this technology predictable. We can tell up front whether or not we can build one of these profiles. And so we know when a case will actually benefit from this, when the evidence can be digitized and can be used to give these law enforcement agencies more information. And unfortunately, what we see more often than not is there's no funding for the technology. Um, there is there has been a push, and we were successful last year to increase the funding for FGG because now it's included in other forensic activity pots that are there in the federal government. But there is no line item for FGG. And unfortunately, when you have a pot of funding and everyone's pulling from that pot of funding, and this is new technology that maybe not everyone knows about or thinks about to use with that pot of funding, what happens is the money runs out before you get to using it for the technology and for actually helping the case move forward. And so I've spent a lot of time talking to many different offices actually and trying to figure out how to get line items, whether it's at the state level or at the federal level, for this technology. We have many senators and representatives that have been very excited and very supportive of this. There's going to be a new bill introduced that's going to ask for a line item for forensic genetic genealogy, which is what this technology is. And I think it'll be the beginning of a pilot study to show people when you put this amount of money just towards this technology, look at how many cases resolved that were sort of stuck for decades. You've seen on our website, I know you have because you guys have followed us for such a long time, that now with a pretty amazing scale, we're able to resolve these cases that were previously deemed unsolvable or unresolvable, right? And cases that have failed many other technologies, cases that were stuck and there was just nothing else that could be done. There were no more leads. There was nothing an investigator could do. And it's not because these investigators are not trying to solve these cases. Every time we speak to them, they're trying, they're out there, they're looking for more information. And there's nothing to do when you don't have that information. And so Othram comes in and we're able to take this intractable evidence and build profiles that give you so many context clues as to what's happening. When you're working an investigation, there's a list of suspects, for example, that you have on your in that investigation. We can very quickly tell you which one of those suspects are ruled out. So this technology can be used for so many different things in an investigation. But what we say often here is we're here to remove uncertainty. If you don't know if this person is a suspect or not, we can tell you that. If you don't know um, the background of the perpetrator, if you don't know where they came from, this is the kind of information you can very quickly get, even in an active investigation. And since the last time we spoke, we actually have seen a huge uptake of active investigations versus cold cases. So now law enforcement agencies that have used this technology to solve their cold cases, they're getting stuck in their current cases and thinking, oh my gosh, we can use Othram. And so they'll call us and they'll say, can we use it now? CODIS didn't have a hit. We're stuck, but this person's still out there. And so we have developed a even faster approach. It's called rapid FGGS, forensic grade genome sequencing. And it's something now that we can go from evidence to answers in less than a couple weeks.
Less than a couple weeks. Wow, that is remarkable. It's a round of applause for you and Othram. What was that before the last time we spoke?
I mean, we would always quote 12 weeks to build a profile, and then the genealogy took some time after that. I think because we built everything in house, we do everything from the time that the evidence arrives all the way through the genealogy with Othram employees. And so every time we help advance one of these cases, we have a truth set. And those truth sets now have increased in volume so much. We have over 1,000 truth sets, and being able to work all these investigations that we can now get a sample, match it to the closest truth set that we have, and very rapidly know how to push it through the pipeline. And so if that's something that's happening, if there's a serial killer out there or a serial rapist that's attacking someone every other day and you know they're going to attack again, we have been able to provide those answers and get that person off the streets. It's not public because obviously many of these are in court, but it will be public one day. And I think that the more people realize that this technology can be used to prevent crime, just as well as identify victims and perpetrators from past crime, I think that the more that this technology will become a standard. And I'm in the federal government every day discussing the possibilities of how this could really change forensic science in the future.
And I have to apologize real quick. When we got into this in the beginning, we didn't even like introduce Othram or anything like that. I just naturally assume that everybody knows who you are and everybody knows what Othram does because you've been on the show and you guys are very public out there. You guys are literally changing the game when it comes to how we identify these unidentified individuals and how we solve these cold cases. And we here don't use the word solve lightly. I mean, it has to be pretty definitive for us to record our voices and put them out there and say this is solved, but that's what you guys do. So that was my apology for not introducing you. If you just want to real quick just say, what do you do at Othram? Just remind the folks out there.
So my name is Dr. Kristen Mittelman, and I'm the Chief Development Officer here at Othram. My job is to figure out how to allow for many more of these cases to actually get funded and to scale. So my job here at Othram is to figure out how do you take this amazing technology that works in the lab, that's incredible, that obviously does help solve these cases. And I say the word help because we provide back that investigative lead, but those law enforcement agents, they're out there chasing that lead, making sure they find the right person, making sure they collect the DNA to confirm it, making sure it fits within the context of their investigation and they can prosecute it or confirm the identity of a victim. Their job does not get any easier because we're helping them get that answer. In fact, it's just often opening another investigation. You identify a victim and now they have to figure out what happened to that person, which maybe we'll talk a little bit more about on the case that we're talking about today in a little bit. But my job is to take the amazing technology that has been built here. In 2018, Othram decided that standard traditional sort of genomic testing that was built for medicine and built for consumers was being used on forensic evidence. And all of us know that forensic evidence is that's all you've got. It's not renewable. It's not, you can't go back to the crime scene and get more DNA. And so often you don't have many chances to run that evidence. DNA testing is a consumable process. And so we decided that using it in a method that would work sometimes if the DNA was in ample quantity or if the DNA was not degraded or not chemically treated, not contaminated, didn't have other factors that made it complicated like many mixtures or other things that we do see in crime scenes, then it would work. But unfortunately, more times than not, it would fail. And once it failed, it took away someone's last chance of getting justice. It took away the chance that law enforcement agency had of actually being able to solve the case one day. And so we decided we were going to purpose build a lab from scratch, a lab that was reimagined to include every case that had DNA, and that we wouldn't consume evidence until we knew that we would actually be able to help bring an answer to that case. And so that's what Othram purpose built to do. We married the forensic process and the forensic lab unidirectional ability. We have actually, it almost looks like an ancient DNA lab. We have these vestibules you go into when you walk in and you get covered from head to toe, and then you're walking into a room with negative pressure, and it's exciting to see. So it's everything that you would do to make sure that you're working with DNA from crime scenes, that is in trace amounts, that is super contaminated, and the human component is the smallest part, that is mixtures, that has all these other complications to it, as I said before. But then inside of that process, we're integrating the latest genomic technology, and we're allowing the most powerful cameras, if I can call them that, sequencers, machines, whatever you want to call them, to actually take the pictures of that DNA and actually make the clearest profiles there are out there from the most intractable evidence. And that way, cases that otherwise would have never worked are starting to build profiles and are starting to get solved. And I think what that shows in a huge way is that this technology now can be used if someone only left a trace amount of DNA at a crime scene. If someone decided they were going to burn their victim to conceal what might have happened to them. We announced a case yesterday of remains that were found in a burned home. They were burned. If someone decided to chemically treat their victim, throw them at the bottom of a lake, all of the things that we've seen in these stories are now things that we have been able to overcome. So knowing that the technology was working so well is what made me come back to Othram and come back to work, actually, because I had decided to take some time off and not work for a little bit there. And I realized that this technology is so powerful and there is so much potential to truly scaling that, but it can't scale with just me coming out here and telling you case by case what's happening. It can't scale unless we truly have advocacy behind it, unless we truly have federal government support, state government support, law enforcement agencies that are asking to use this technology, and advocates that want this technology out there to complement standard forensic testing. And so I joined about 2.5 years ago now, and that's exactly what I've done. I've been here ever since trying to scale this. And you can see in the first year that we were open, we solved a few cases a year, and then a few cases a month, and then a few cases a week. And now we're returning leads on a few cases a day. And we're announcing about a case a day lately, and that's super exciting. But I know there's going to be a day when we're announcing a case an hour, and I can't wait because this is really scaling. It's scaling exponentially. And the more it scales, the more it actually has the intended effect, which is perpetrators are out there thinking, you know what, I might get caught. And maybe I shouldn't do this. And maybe this will become a deterrent and we all will live in a safer world one day.
So you lobby and you petition and you present in front of, you said, state governments, federal governments, to try to get these policymakers to hear you and to make these changes. Do you ever find that it takes a lot to convince these individuals because maybe they're a bit old school in their thinking? How do you approach that?
It's a mixed bag. Yes, absolutely. There are individuals that immediately get it, whether they've had someone missing in their family, whether they've been affected by crime, they immediately are spoken to by the cause. And they jump in immediately and ask, how can we help? And that's incredible. And then there are individuals that worry. This is new technology. This is technology that exists at Othram right now, forensic grade genome sequencing, which is the method that has been used to identify more perpetrators and victims from crime scenes in the United States than any other single method, was built here at Othram and doesn't exist anywhere else. Well, that's hard. You know, these are the things that we all have to think about. This is so new. This is something that now eventually needs to start being deployed. This is something that needs to be, I don't even know what, regulated, accredited, all the things that you think about that came in line in medicine. And a lot of us here at Othram, in fact, were part of that process, right? When sequencing came into the medical world back, decades ago, everyone was like, well, this isn't going to be used to diagnose patients or to figure out what type of treatment to give to patients. But now personal genomics is something that is almost in every clinic across the United States. But it took time. You needed NIST to create those standards for the FDA that sort of allowed the ability for people to know that when people sequence your genome, they're getting every letter that they need to get and they can get to their right answer. All those things need to happen again. And David was part of that project that created the standards for medicine. A lot of us here actually were part of several of those projects in genomics that helped build this sort of field in medicine. It's time to do it again in forensics, but it takes time. And so I understand the hesitation as well. I also know that every time I meet a family member from any one of these cases, and I'm lucky enough to get to meet family members often that tell me they've waited every day for 40 years, for 35 years, for 52 years to find out this answer every single day of their life. They looked for that person, or they looked for the person that harmed their loved one, and they couldn't go to bed, or they went back to the crime scene, lived in the same house, hoping someone would knock on the door and give them the answer. Their lives are stuck. And so I know the potential this technology has to actually give people the answers they absolutely so desperately need. And I know how effective it is. And so just because it's hard or it's new or it's something that hasn't been done before, it doesn't deter me one bit from having those difficult conversations. In fact, I welcome them. I want to have those conversations. I want to hear every argument against this technology, and I want to address it until it's something that is such a no-brainer to use that it becomes not extraordinary anymore to take a cold case and solve it after 40 years. It becomes ordinary that every cold case, every backlog is actually solved, and that we're living in a world where cases don't go cold. If you don't have that hidden CODIS, if it hasn't provided that identity of the perpetrator or that victim that you're looking for, then it's time to use this technology to sort of give you insights to that identity. And then you can use the standard technology that has been used for decades and tested in court to confirm that identity, to make sure that we have that double check, that it goes to court with the methods that we're all used to, that are all controlled and have all those standards already, until this becomes a standard way that investigations go so that they're never cold. I hope we live in a world where cold cases have become extinct.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Does law enforcement have to contact Othram for a connection to be made?
Absolutely. So we only work for law enforcement. And so we would never take a case unless law enforcement imported it into our portal and let us know that they're following the DOJ guidelines that exist for FGG right now, and that, let us know exactly what's happened to that evidence up until the time that it came to Othram. That's important for a million reasons. We can't control what would be sent to us if we were working with consumers at this point. This technology is super powerful and it needs to be used right. And so that's exactly what we do here.
Okay, so you don't take requests from the public. It's not a radio station.
No, if there is a case that people care about, often we've had family members reach out because they've seen us on your show. They've seen us on TV. Maybe we solved a case that sounded similar to theirs. I pass that on to our liaisons. We have different law enforcement liaisons in each region of the United States. And I would pass it on to the liaison that has that agency, and they will call and ask the agency if they have that case and if they would be willing to try this technology, and let them know that the family member reached out to us. So we would try. We do what we do for the families and for the victims. And so it's not that I don't take a request. I would love to solve everyone's case and give everyone peace and answer. It's just that we have to do it in the way that the custodian of that evidence, which is the law enforcement agency, is actually providing that evidence and granting us permission to work on that case.
Are there any cases that you would love to work on that you haven't been able to make a connection with?
I mean, absolutely. There are so many cases that I see where I know this technology could be helpful, and we're not working that case. You can only work so many cases at a time, and agencies are prioritizing their cases as well. And so we wait and we trust that it'll eventually come across our table. But yeah, I see things all the time where I think, oh, FGG would be perfect for this. This is something that we could help with. And I look forward to seeing those cases cross our desk.
Okay, now I would love to speak about the Jane Doe, formerly known as Granby Girl, and now she is Patricia Tucker once again. Can you tell us a bit about this case and Othram's involvement?
Yeah, so this is one of the first cases we worked in Massachusetts, and you can see there's a couple announced now, and now we have a partnership with them. We're working many more cases I'm excited about.
Yeah.
But this was a case where the remains were found outside, and they were actually quite contaminated. They were degraded. There was all those things that are difficult about finding on human remains outside. They were part of this case. This was one of those cases that was a little bit more difficult to get DNA from. And so when we got the bones, we did our standard suitability analysis. We did know that we could work this case and we could build a profile, but we knew that we'd have to collect more data. And so we did. We worked on the case for some time and built the best DNA profile that we could build from those remains, and then uploaded the profile to these genealogical databases consented for law enforcement use. Our in-house genealogy team worked on the matches and was able to provide a family member back, a name of a family member back to the law enforcement agency. When they contacted that family member, the family member pointed them to Patricia's living son and said that, yes, there was someone missing in their family, and they believed that he would be the closest match. And so law enforcement followed up on that lead and collected DNA. And we were able to show that there was 100% parent-child match. And so our identity was confirmed. Which he had been looking for his mom the entire time. This is a story where the person she was married to at the time dropped him off, and then he left with the mother and he never saw her again. And he had spent all of these years, 4.5 decades, looking for her. And this was able to give him that answer of, this is what happened. Your mom didn't run away. She didn't leave you. Like, these are things that people live with forever. Did my parent just leave me here and go somewhere else? Are they still alive and will they come back one day? Did something terrible happen to them? Can I find out what happened to them and get justice for them? These are sort of the everyday questions that these families live with that start to unravel when you are able to give a name to those unidentified remains that were found.
Yeah, and you raise a really good point there that people live with this every single day of their lives. And this individual, her son, I mean, lived with it thinking that his mom might have abandoned him. And you don't know what that does. People don't know what that does to that person when they become a parent and how they start treating their children. And to finally get the answer, maybe that will help in any difficulty that that person might have had in parenting. Maybe there's time to, I don't know, undo some damage that was unintentionally caused because this parent felt like he was abandoned and she felt like she was abandoned, and it goes back generations. So it is a much larger scoped mission beyond just like our world of true crime. I mean, this is something that actually can help generationally.
Absolutely. And it is something that follows the families. This is something I remember, the Little Miss Nobody case. She was a little girl that was found in Arizona. I don't know if you remember, but we identified her as Sharon Lee Gallegos, and it had been some time. The nephew of her mom was actually at the press conference. So that's quite far removed. And so it was the sister's son. And he said that his entire life he had been treated differently because his mother's niece was taken. And so she was afraid to let him go outside and play. She was terrified of people that she didn't know coming around him. And they lived their whole life almost in fear because of that incident, not being able to resolve that incident that had happened to them. It even affected his children and the children after that. So these are things that people will tell you. You're right. This is a multi-generational thing. And you live with those questions. You live with those doubts in your mind of, is this person going to call me? Are they going to come back? Are they looking for me? Are they on Facebook? I hear from families often that they spend hours a day looking for someone on Facebook, scrolling through faces and hoping they'll find the person because maybe they changed their name, maybe they changed some, like anyone with the same first name. Those are just I can't imagine missing someone I love so very much and spending hours a day looking for them. But I do know that even when the news isn't good news, even when the news is this is what happened to your loved one and they're no longer here, they're always thanking us. They're always grateful because they feel like the truth allows them to move over to the next chapter of this story and that they were sort of stuck there. Um, and that's really heavy and it's really hard to think about. And unless you've been in that situation where you've lost someone or something happened to someone you loved very much, I think it's hard to process. But I have not met one family member. I have not met one law enforcement agent that worked a case for decades that didn't need to know that answer. And the ripple effect of how many people a case affects is huge. We think of the family, right? That's the first thing you think about. Okay, well, here's the family that was affected by the fact that this person was murdered or they left. But then there are the people that are suspects in that investigation that didn't commit the crime and their families and how they feel affected, because often these happen in towns where people know a lot about people. I've met people that were suspects for 46 years and went to Alaska to exile themselves because they felt so guilty about the fact that the entire community believed that they had committed that crime. Law enforcement agents that either have died in the line of duty and their families trying to figure out this case, law enforcement agents that have spent decades bringing that file home and looking for the right person or who committed this crime because it affected them so much to find a dead body of a 9-year-old girl or something. It was one of those things that they couldn't live without getting the answer to. And it changes you. It changes you. It changes the people around you. It changes the community as a whole. These cases change us. We work on them from, anywhere from three weeks to a year that I see these cases on my desk. And I'm affected by the stories and I need to know the answer. And I feel like I can't go to bed at night if I can't figure it out. I can't imagine doing that for decades and being able to live an absolutely normal life. It really is a big blast radius, much larger than people think, for every one of these cold cases. And there's 250,000 of these cold cases in the United States today, and over 40,000, 50,000 unidentified remains where we don't even know who the victim is. How do you even start that investigation? And they're missing from someone. Their story is gone forever. Recently, we had another story of a little girl. It was Opelika Jane Doe. She was only a few years old, 3 years old, when her father got custody of her from her mother, in a court in Virginia. He was married. He was older. Her mother was 19 years old and young. So the court gave him custody for a more stable environment. And when we found the remains of this, when the law enforcement found the remains of this little girl, they were broken in several places, and the breaks had healed in different times. And she had her occipital bone was broken, and she had 15 fractures on her body, and her teeth were missing, and she was malnutritioned, and it was all obvious from just these skeletal remains. And I remember hoping that she would have some sort of like brittle bone disorder or some reason for why this poor child had all these breaks. But you fear the worst, that she was so terribly abused at 3 years old, 4 years old, and she had been beaten to death and left at the bottom of a riverbed in a different state. Um, and no one had ever reported her missing. No one had ever said that this person was gone, because usually when there's a little child, the person that would report the crime is the person that might be responsible for the crime, especially when it's not reported. Um, and in that sense, this little kid was voiceless. When we were able to identify, build a profile that helped identify where the who the family was, the mother was still paying child support. 10 years later, she was still paying child support to the father that had murdered this child. She didn't know her daughter was missing. She didn't know anything had happened to her daughter. And now she was able to know that her daughter didn't just not want to speak to her, which is what she thought, but her daughter actually was gone. She wanted to keep doing right by her so when she turned 18, she could finally tell her how much she actually cared. This entire time, she had named this little girl Amore, love. And it broke my heart because this is a story of how now the father and his current wife have been extradited from Florida to Alabama, and they're standing trial for murder. And the father confessed already, and I don't know about the ex-wife. This is all happening in real time. But what I know for a fact is this little girl was voiceless, and she would have remained voiceless forever if it wasn't for this technology, because there's no way that her DNA would have been in a previous perpetrator database. She obviously was a young girl. She wasn't a perpetrator. And this would have been unsolved forever. Her mom would have spent the rest of her life thinking her daughter never forgave her and looking for her and trying to make amends and closure. She would have continued to be victimized by these people that she paid child support to that murdered her child. Um, when you see, that's just one example. Every story feels like that to me. Every story feels like someone's story that needs to be told, that would forever remain untold unless we were able to do what we did. In the Granby case that we're talking about today, this woman, she would have, her bones were so contaminated that she would have remained unnamed. And by remaining unnamed, not only is her son someone that would never know what happened to his mother and where she went, but the crime could never be investigated. Obviously, someone murdered her. Obviously, her body was left there. So now it's time to figure out what happened and how can you piece someone's last few weeks of life together, who got her there, who saw her last, who she was with, what was going on in her relationship, all of the things that you need to know as an investigator. If you don't have a name for that person, you can't do it. And this technology allows for that to happen. It allows for people to be able to tell the rest of the story, to truly get justice for these people. And maybe her perpetrator's dead. I know her husband at the time is a big person of interest in this case, in this investigation that's already been public. And he's already passed away. So maybe justice isn't something that will happen in this lifetime, but her story will be told the way that it should, not as someone that disappeared from her family's life and never came back, but as someone that was murdered. And the person that murdered her, their name will go down as someone that murdered someone and not just someone that got away with it. I think that's important, to be able to piece people's stories back to reality. And I think that's a lot of what we do here at Othram, and it means the world to me.
How long was Othram working on the Granby Girl case?
I think we were working on the case for almost 2 years. This was a difficult case as far as the bones actually producing a profile. And the genealogy part was actually only a few months of that. And so it truly was the building of that DNA profile, collecting enough data from those remains that were so contaminated and so very difficult to collect DNA data from. The human component of those bones was very small.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. For someone like me who doesn't really know like what that means when you say it was hard to build a profile, can you take me through that a little bit? I understand you got samples that were sent to you. What is the process in building a profile?
So we usually get, well, in this case, it's bones, but the sample is any sample that came from that crime scene. And so our initial process is to see if we can get DNA from the whatever sample came in. And so we get that DNA and then we look at the properties of that DNA. And that's where I said this one had very low human component. So there was a lot of DNA that was found in those bones, but most of it had to do with DNA that was either bacterial contamination from being outside, other animal DNA, other things that made it very difficult for those bones to, the ratio between human DNA and non-human DNA was not ideal for being able to sequence it. Because when you use one of these really powerful sequencers, you're actually sequencing all of that DNA, right? And so if your human component is something very, very small and everything else is something that has a lot of amount of DNA there, then the ability of you to be able to get the right picture of that human component and enough markers for you to build that profile, remove everything else, and be able to upload it to a genealogical database and get the correct matches and not just a whole bunch of matches that maybe you then shift through that are not the correct matches, then you have to do a lot of genomic filtering. You have to do a lot. There's just so many processes that go through what we do here at Othram that we call forensic grade genome sequencing, but it really isn't one step. And no sample goes through the exact same steps to get to that sequencer. They go through different steps depending on that properties of that DNA. And that's why I said initially it took us time to run, even though we knew we could build a profile, it took us time to figure out what steps to put it through in order to get those best pictures. Now that we've done it with a lot of these different case scenarios, now that we've had all these crime scenes come in, if we can match it to a case that already exists, then we know exactly what steps to go through. And then it can happen in days. It doesn't have to take weeks to figure out exactly what the right protocol is. That's why it's becoming rapid. But that's not something someone can just develop or build or put on their price list tomorrow. It's something that it truly has come from working all of these cases and collecting all of these truth sets. I know that after Othram started saying that we do QC and suitability analysis, everyone added that price list item to their list, even if they working on their very first sample. And I sort of thought to myself, how? How are you doing QC if you don't have the truth sets to compare it to? What are you comparing to? Are you just measuring that there's DNA there? Are you even measuring if it's human DNA? And and I've had these conversations. You guys know I'm very direct. So no one's going to meet me and not know what I'm thinking, right? So I've had these conversations directly and asked. And they were like, oh, well, oh, we didn't think. And I thought to myself, like, this is the problem. There needs to be a method. There needs to be a process created in which there is a negative something negative that happens if you have to report it. For example, report your success rates. There's something negative that happens if you run this DNA evidence and you get nothing because you've consumed it and you have destroyed the chance that case had to being solved. And so a doctor, when they treat a patient and that patient doesn't make it for whatever reason, or a fertility doctor treats a patient, a couple, and they don't get pregnant, that becomes part of their statistics. I'm working with a federal government where we have to report our statistics. Everyone should have to report how often do you succeed. If you succeed one or two or 10 times, but you're failing 100 times in conjunction, that's not good. That's not helping. And this is something that's not being measured at all right now. It's not reported, it's not measured. In fact, there are public posts that told me that they don't believe the measure of success should be a solved case. Okay. Well, then we need to figure out what this field thinks the measure of success is, and we need to start working on that because to me, it's being able to help law enforcement solve that case. In fact, we've changed the Othram logo. I don't know if you saw it. We removed the lines from the DNA. Please visit othram.com. You'll see it. And we still have the hexagon, which is the carbon ring of life. But right now, in the inside of the carbon ring of life, the dead space is a person. And that is because our unit of success here at Othram has nothing to do with DNA. Our unit of success here at Othram is the identification of that person at the end of the case that we're working on. And so we have rebranded to show that because that is success.
You people. You even look at your logo and you're like, it's not working. It's not.
No, you don't. You want it to be, the right thing. You want it. Oh, I have it on my little desk. You see them? So there's a hexagon ring of life, and
Mm.
there's the dead space that is actually the person. And so it's very much the same, but also very different because it tells you why we do everything we do here. And it honestly, if it's distilled to that, if it's distilled to let's build the best technology, disseminate it to as many people as possible so that everyone is able to solve their case the first time they run that evidence, everyone is able to get those answers, then I think we're going to live in a much better world. And we're getting there. I think we're getting there. I have had nothing but support federally and in state agencies recently. And I will tell you, it's infinitely easier for me to have the discussions that I'm having this year than it was last year. Infinitely. And that to me shows that being able to announce case after case after case, being able to come on shows like yours, being able to have those TV episodes that sort of feature the technology, it's working. People know what's possible now, and people are willing to advocate for it rather than be afraid of it. Change is difficult. Technology has been what it is. I mean, the last time forensic science changed was in the 90s with CODIS testing. This We've been there for 30 years. But this is, I believe, the next big movement, the next big change that's going to happen in forensic science. And I am beyond thrilled to be at the ground floor of it.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Tell me about the databases that you use. I know you've got your own database at DNA Solves, but what if a sample or relative that you're trying to find has not used that database at this point? What do you do then?
We use every database that's available for law enforcement purposes. So we would upload to Family Tree DNA and GenMatch. So we would upload to both of those as well if it's not in DNA Solves. Our profiles are getting so robust and so clean because we've been iterating on this technology for so long that we're able to get really distant relationships, sixth cousins, fifth cousins, fourth cousins, just these really distant relationships, not just a first cousin or a second cousin. And so that increases the chances of you having someone in the database that is related to this person. And so even our database is able to give us those matches often. And it's something that is exciting to be a part of and to see that as the profiles get better and better and better, and as the databases increase in size because people want to put their DNA in there to help investigations. Maybe someone's missing someone and they see that this technology is now all of a sudden working and identifying all these unidentified remains. And so they enter their DNA. Or maybe someone's been affected by crime and they hope that the perpetrator gets caught the first time or the second time they commit a crime and not the 10th, 11th, and 12th. And so they put their DNA in a database. But the databases are growing. And as the databases grow and the profiles get better and better, the cases are going to solve faster and faster. And that's super exciting too, because that's going to make it easier for us to increase the scale and to increase the number of cases that we work on, which will allow the technology to be even more effective.
You said something a few minutes ago that bothered me, and I just want to circle back to it. And it was that some people in this field don't consider a positive ID something that should be measured as success.
That's exactly right. We
All
have
right.
been very much so criticized for announcing the cases that law enforcement allows to be announced. I explained very clearly why I believe everyone's story should be told and why I believe it shouldn't be lost in time. And I believe everyone deserves their story told and be tied back into family. I believe that you can't measure the success of this technology unless you are measuring the number of positive IDs. To be able to do any other part of this and not get to that ID is a failure, in my opinion. And so we disagree. We disagree, but that's not a metric that we get to set. That's a metric that we all get to discuss, sit around a round table and figure out how to set. But it's a metric I feel very strongly about because I come from the place of wanting to make change for families, wanting to make change for victims. And I don't know how you do that if your metric isn't the identification of that person. Even if you're doing everything else right, if you're not getting to that identification, then what are you doing? And how do we convince federal government, state government, law enforcement agencies across the US and the world to use this technology if we're not discussing the stories of how this technology has helped? How do we give hope to families that have been waiting decades and have lost hope and being able to figure out what happened to their loved one if we can't tell a story of another family that just found out after waiting 62 years? I don't know the answer to those questions. The best way that I know to do it is to enumerate every story I can, and I do on DNA Solves, to tell that story, to advocate for that person, to have their story told by others, whether it's on your show, on social media, anywhere, so that people realize the impact that this actually has. If you guys disagree, I'm willing to discuss that.
Would never disagree with you about anything. That is a losing endeavor.
I hope you would. I hope you know that I'm the kind of person that I would love to have that discussion, because when I do something, I do it out of the true belief that it's the right thing to do, and it's the best way to grow this field. We have our first principle here at Othram, something that we tell every employee on day one, is do what's best for your case. That is really the first principle. And I really believe that what's best for these cases is to advocate for them from beginning to end. And I think every single part of us, because there's different people that there's a different person that's going to extract that DNA, and a different person that's going to figure out if it's suitable, and a different person that's going to do the genomic part of it, and a different person that is the case liaison that's working with law enforcement and giving the leads, a different person that's doing the genealogy, a different person that might have funded the case in this case, a different person that advocated that the case came in from the agency. Who knows? But there's so many of us that touch it. But at each one of those stories, we each have a role, and we have to know that what we're doing is what's best for that case. This, like I said, this is we're in uncharted territory. This is a new field. And so if you think it's the wrong way, I would have that discussion gladly, and I would try to understand it. And I've taken those comments and I've tried to truly understand them. And in trying to understand them, we realized that we maybe focus too much on the science and not enough on telling people the purpose behind this technology. And that's where the new logo came out of. And that's where we emerge a completely new campaign. I mean, David said it's a revolution in cold case resolutions, and that's exactly what it is. It is like a revolution, and it is completely different than what has been done before. No one's done it, and who knows what's right and what's wrong. But I do know that I truly believe that we're getting somewhere. I truly see change. I see law enforcement agencies that we've never even talked to or worked with calling us every single day and asking us to work a case. That was certainly not happening a few years ago. I see people that have used this technology for cold cases turning it and wanting to use it immediately on their contemporary cases. That certainly was not happening. I see support when I walk into Senate offices and representative offices now that I didn't see when this first started. And I see a growing group of people that are advocating to make this something that becomes a standard. And that to me is exciting.
Bill Thomas told me that he disagreed with a lot of what you say in these interviews. He said you should take it up with him directly.
I will tell him. I will. No, Bill, I love Bill. And,
Yeah.
he's a family member. And it's hard to disagree with Bill because, you know, he's been through that experience 100%. But I think that my heart, my reason and my why is more aligned with Bill's mentality of why he does what he does than it is with a scientist mentality or someone that's running a business. And I think that's obvious to you guys in this conversation. I have young children, so my why is not something I discuss publicly, but it's something that has made me take a very different approach to how I do this job and why I do this job and why we built Othram. And so a lot of what's out there is just slowing the field down. And it's frustrating to people like me because I see how fast this could be adopted if everyone worked together rather than working apart. And I don't care what company's more successful, and I don't care who makes the most money, but I care how many families get answers, and I care how many victims get justice, more than I can ever say. And so when you tell me that a solve is not a metric, well, I care and I fight. And so here I am.
See, I was going to present a hypothetical, like I would play the devil's advocate here, and every time I was like, okay, well, I'm going to say, what about this? And then you answered it. So I can't even do a hypothetical because you answer it in your like as my brain is working. The only thing I can think of if I'm going to be a devil's advocate is how do you respond to somebody who is very hesitant or fearful of DNA just being out there. Like people hear that I don't want my DNA out there. Like that could go so wrong. This isn't a society where we should have our information just scientifically broken down. And I'm going to be charged with a crime I didn't commit because of touch DNA. How do you quell that fear?
I actually understand because, I mean, I grew up on a tiny Greek island where we didn't even have science labs growing up and doing this kind of stuff. And then I moved to the US and went to a top 3 medical school and came back and showed. I remember when the first time I showed my grandma, I'd made these fluorescent green-eyed mice that were blind, and we were trying to cure these mice. And my grandma almost passed out. She was just like, what are you doing? This is from another world. Like, this is all wrong. She started making crosses on me with olive oil and running around. And I just remember thinking, this is, not everyone understands what we're doing and understands science, and that's okay. And what I would tell those people is, don't let your DNA be out there. Hold on to it until you feel comfortable with this technology. It's okay. It's not necessary that everyone participates for this technology to be successful, and it's okay to be hesitant. The other thing I would say is that this technology is something that's meant to make investigations more certain and not less certain. If done right, this is a very scaffold approach. The DNA was actually found at the crime scene. The DNA was found to be something that's probative by law enforcement agency, which means if someone just had touch DNA on their shirt, that probably would not ever be tested using this technology. That's not probative DNA. But if someone had touch DNA on a gun, and the gun was the murder weapon, that's a little bit different. So this is something that was deemed to be probative in that investigation. And when you have a list of suspects, because that's everyone in the area that might have had that gun, for example, purchased that gun within a certain amount of time, that list is always longer and much more of a sledgehammer approach than a list of who would fit the DNA profile built. In fact, with looking at hundreds and hundreds of thousands of markers, no one would fit the DNA profile but that one person. And it's confirmed by standard technology that has been here for 30 years, tested in court for 30 years, and gives you rates like 1 in 17 quintillion every time you're able to identify someone. And so this isn't the type of DNA testing that leaves room for error. We are not going to give you someone's characteristics. We are not going to tell you what someone might look like. Those things to us are more abstract and could be different depending on other factors more than just DNA. What we're doing is we're giving a name, an identity back to the person that left DNA at that crime scene. We've worked a case. This is an interesting case, by the way. There was a pool of blood at a crime scene, and someone was murdered in that parking lot outside that bar. And so they collected that pool of blood, couldn't identify the person. That person was put into CODIS, and there was no identification. That person stayed in CODIS after that, trying to figure it out. We identified the person from that pool of blood, and that led to us, the law enforcement agency, figuring out that this person had actually tripped and fallen outside that bar that day, left a pool of blood there, and had nothing to do with the crime whatsoever. Their DNA remained in CODIS for a long time, even though it didn't belong in CODIS, because it was collected at the crime scene thinking that it was something that was related to that crime. It was just 2 different timelines. And now that person was removed from CODIS, and the investigation continued in a different direction. There, yes, you can identify things from a crime scene that may not be the perpetrator, that may not be the answer, but this is not done in a vacuum. This is done in context of an investigation. And it leads to the truth, and it leads to removing uncertainty.
Well, that answered my hypothetical devil's advocate question. I'll never question you again.
Well, thank you, Kristen. This has been great speaking with you here today. Really appreciate you spending some time with us.
I really appreciate the time again, and I appreciate the advocacy, you guys helping people with the burial and other things on these cases. It means a lot to me that you guys care for these victims, for their families, for telling their story, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come on your show.
Fantastic. Well, you're welcome back anytime. I'm sure in the next 2 or 3 hours there'll be a few more solves, and we'll get you back on at like 6:30.
We do have one today, and we have another one coming out tomorrow, so keep looking.